Hi, Kelly. Welcome to our next podcast.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Kelly Mayfield. I am a school librarian. I'm also an author, although what I've published is a handbook for school librarians. So you probably don't want to go check it out if you're a fiction reader. And I wanted to talk about some great YA books and some crossover artists that you might want to read from in the adult space as well.
I am very excited to talk to you about YA authors in the crossover space. I interviewed some of those, so many authors who are in the YA space are moving to the adult space or trying different genres. Like experience that I had, well, some of them were like, it was a secret project. It was like, I had no time. I had time and I needed to write something else and I needed to sell it differently. And so then a lot of times that's where the shifts come in.
Uh-huh.
First things first, I want to talk about the library because it's National Library Week. You work as a public library, but as a librarian, but you also work in school libraries, which is ground zero. School libraries are important, but they are. And this is ground zero for book banning.
Yes.
And many of the things that impact your day to day life, your kids' day to day life happens in the school library. So, talk
Mhm.
to us about the importance of school libraries and what they're all about.
School libraries, they have 20 years or more of studies that show what a huge impact they have on literacy rates, especially for impoverished schools, because at our system here in the United States, the funding for the school is tied to how much they pay in taxes. So if you live in an impoverished area, you have an impoverished school, and you're less likely to have a school library, and you're less likely to have a school librarian. So having access to those books and a trained librarian to support the teachers there has a very big impact on education. And one of my fears is that as the book bannings have really taken off and parents are saying, I don't want this in the library, I don't want that, then some schools are going to make the decision to just stop having the library altogether. Already, I think they're like 40% of schools don't have a trained librarian in them. They might have a part-time person, which is actually how I came into the job is I was hired having never worked in a library before. And I loved it and pursued the education so that I am now like a trained librarian as.
I love this. I actually grew up in a place where there was no public libraries. I grew up in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico did not have public libraries when I was growing up. We had bookstores, we had access to books in school, and we have school libraries. That's actually where I got some of the like reading taste and reading experience. I also grew up in the 80s and 90s where we didn't have the internet, which I took for
Yeah.
granted. But a lot of the research happened in libraries. Like libraries were an important part. School libraries were
Hmm.
not just for books for fun, but they also book for education, understanding different things. Encyclopedias were part of it. Things that, we didn't. I come from the generation where we didn't trust the internet, or like our teachers did not trust the internet. Now they trust,
Yeah.
they take like Wikipedia as
Uh-huh.
like a source, but we didn't. So we had to learn, actually had to go pick up a book in the school library. And that
Yes.
included college and actually like side research, side sources, and actually it was specific. There was no scrolling. There was no like search button. You literally have to go and look for it. And I think
Yes.
in some ways, school libraries are like now they have, well, obviously we have the internet, we have mobile, we have computers, we have access to databases are full of research and everything. So a lot of times this might be, and as a computer, like it's different than
Mhm.
when I was in my time, but school libraries offer places where kids or teenagers can actually, or even college students who have access to books that they wouldn't normally wouldn't pick up because it's free for them to do it. It's free for them to borrow and to explore different things that they may not feel safe to buy the book or they may not have the funds to do
Mhm.
it. Yeah. So I love this. Okay. So let's talk about some book recommendations. You're talking some YA authors who have crossover. You're also a YA reader, not just because you're part of the job, but also like you enjoy YA. Talk to them about like experience of what do you enjoy about YA and what are some of the common things you notice in the genre that were probably before the 2010s, like when we were growing up to now in the
Mhm.
2020s as the gender has changed.
Yes. I grew up, it sounds like I'm a little bit older than you when there weren't a lot of young adult books. When you got to be a teenager, you mostly just read adult books. And I read, say, Stephen King way before any kid growing up now would read Stephen King. And so part of that is not having the idea that you have to stay in a particular category because kind of everything was available to you. One thing that I started reading in YA was I was very interested in fantasy that was not based in a European culture. I remember in high school thinking like, why are all these fantasies based in medieval Europe? And I love medieval Europe as a setting, but I was like, surely if you're being fantastic about something, you could imagine a different setting. And one thing that I think still today in YA is that it's ahead of the curve. It's much more diverse. I think it's easier for authors from different ethnicities to be published in the YA space. And so I started reading some of those Asian setting fantasies because they weren't really being published in the adult space. And the other reason that I really YA is because it is kind of simple in that you can count on a happy ending. And I read literary fiction. I love literary fiction, but sometimes it seems like we're going to make the biggest cast of horrible people and have them make awful decisions. And it's, again, I can read that book and enjoy it, but sometimes what I want is to know there's going to be a happy ending and somebody is going to grow as a person and become more adult, we could say, more mature in their decisions. And so in the same way that a lot of women or readers enjoy reading romance novels because they know they're going to get that familiar tropes and they know that there's going to be a happily ever after. That's one thing that if you're feeling stressed or you just want kind of a break between heavy books, then I pick up YA because I can really enjoy the stories and I know that I'm not going to have deep thoughts about it.
Yes, I grew up with Sweet Valley High, Babysitter's Club. I'm a 90s kid. So that's where I grew up. And I actually read Sweet Valley High all the way till junior year of high school because it was weird. I was in Puerto Rico. Literature, it was not cool to read English. It was just, it was my preference. I was bilingual. So I read Spanish literature in school. I read some of the classics in English, but not a lot of them. But my joy was to escape with Sweet Valley High or to escape with what was going to happen to Jessica and Elizabeth or what was going to happen to those little commercial love stories. And then I ended up graduating after that to chick lit, like basically, the very natural progression of a Dinner for Wieners, a Jane Greens, and Sophie Kinsella. Those books were, oh my gosh, it's a graduation. But after that, I ended up reading a lot of dystopian and a lot of like a contemporary because I was like, I needed something else. It was much more easier to consume and to find recommendations. I didn't start reading adults until 2016, randomly when someone was talking about romance. And I was like, oh, there's a whole genre because I knew that I like fantasy. I knew but what I like about fantasy was the romantic plot. I needed the plot, but I needed the connection. And so that's how I was introduced. I introduced romance in 2016. I was like, oh, there's a whole genre that has the same elements that I wanted to. But for a long time, I read YA, and I love the explosion of YA that happened post-Twilight, but also the explosion of contemporary YA that happened in the 2010s, that we got to see queer representation, Black representation, books about topical things that were happening in the day-to-day in a way that made it seem like actually not just interesting to read, but also like lived experiences that we can actually see ourselves part of. And I think YA has a lot, like the genre has allowed to have a much more diverse entry point that we don't see that often in adult. Adult just, it feels like a harder market to sell than YA. YA is pretty simple to see. There's plenty of trans books, trans romance books. There's plenty of queer representation or Black representation or Latina representation. There are more Latina books, like books of Latina, than there are likely on the Roman space. There's more representation beyond just one area and stuff.
And earlier this month on my Substack, I was writing about novels in verse and how I was first introduced to those through the YA space, where I wouldn't say that they're super common, but it's not at all unusual to run across one. And then I specifically went searching to see if I could find them in contemporary adult books. And they were there, but they were much more experimental and literary, I would say, than picking up a YA where it seems like it's a legitimate way to tell a contemporary story. And so that's one area where I feel like, again, they're kind of a trend being ahead of traditional adult fiction.
Yeah. All right, let's head to recommendations. Tell us the first book you want to recommend.
Okay. So first I'm going to start with Rainbow Rowell. And
Yep.
I picked up, so I pulled a lot of these from my library. They're not necessarily. Eleanor and Park was my gateway book to Rainbow Rowell. And that's a kind of nostalgic 90s, two misfits become friends and then more than friends. And it also hits some pretty heavy topics. Rainbow Rowell, though, I think was known for writing she wrote fanfic first and before she became an author. And so Fangirl involves a young woman who is a fan of fan fiction. And this book got so big that Rainbow Rowell then wrote the fan fiction that she had invented for this, which was Simon Snow, and I forget what it was called, but it's a Harry Potter ripoff. And I thought that was hilarious. So that's become graphic novels. She wrote a trilogy of the Simon Snow. But more recently, she's been publishing adult romances. Slow Dance was published in 2024, and that's kind of a Jane Austen persuasion retelling. I wouldn't say it's exact retelling, but you can definitely see some things in common. And then Cherry Baby is coming out this month, or maybe was just released. And I'm really excited to read that one as well.
I do have access to Cherry Baby, and I'm excited to read it. I'm like, I just have to bump it. But I really love Rainbow Rowell. We're reading Eleanor Park and be like nostalgic about that time. And then reading Fangirl and be like, oh, there's fan fiction. Because I had no idea what fan fiction was. I'm still amazed by when I talk to authors who started fan fiction. I'm like, how did you get started? What was this whole world? My experience, my entry point of fan fiction was The Summer Turned Pretty, not the actual TV show, the books 10 years ago when there was barely any fan fiction because I was so mad at the ending of The Summer Turned Pretty that I was like, I need a better ending than this. So, all right, talk to the second book recommendation.
Okay, so Jessie Q. Sutanto. She, let's see, dial A for aunties.
Okay.
She wrote a YA book called The Obsession, and A for Aunties came out. She is really prolific. And The Obsession I read recently, and it came out in 2021. And it's kind of like angry girl fiction a bit, but she kind of turns on her head. You're expecting the story to go one way with the girl to be rescued, and it ends up going in a completely different direction. And she's also written some adult thrillers. You Will Never Be Me came out in 2024, and that's about influencers. So I feel like she has one section that's about thrillers and famous people and internet, but then she also writes these mysteries that involve great big extended Asian families. There's one about a Chinese grandma that goes and solves murders because she knows that the police are not going to do it right. I just love them, and they have big ensemble casts. So I feel like she is starting to come into the romance space. This is a gamer girl high school romance where she moves and ends up running into this guy that they have been playing together under gamer handle names. And then she realizes that she's now going to school with this guy.
I love Jessica Sutanto, the Vera Wong, not Vera Wang, Vera Wong.
Yes, thank you. That was the name.
She's solving murders. I really love that series. I actually have her latest cozy-ish, Mrs. Mabel something. It's a heiress, kind of like she
goes back to the chopping block.
Yes.
Miss Mabel goes back to the chopping block.
Yeah. So she actually, I read it. I loved it. It's basically her husband leaves her for somebody else, and she goes back to Clarice, which is, I need to go back to Harvard. Essentially like legally London, and goes back to Clarice school in Scotland, and then she has to solve a murder. But she's such an interesting character. I really love the characters that Jessie does build, and that they're actually funny, but they're also they're touching. They're relatable. Even I read the influencer one. I don't remember the name I'll put it on the show notes.
Never Be
It
Me.
would
I
never
think
be
that
me.
was the one.
That was an interesting one, whereas it's toxic female friendships. And you're just like, you're not sure who you're rooting for. You're like, okay, but they both are terrible. But you're like, yeah, but I can relate to those because I watched
Uh-huh.
my Instagram ad that's telling me
Yeah.
talks like a like an idealized motherhood that does not exist. So
Yeah, I just love how she manages to mix in all of this thriller, suspense, and tension, but also cozy romance, not romance, cozy mystery and
yeah,
food. She always brings in the food vibes and she can have humor in there. And she puts out so many books too.
so all right, we got the third one, which is T. Kingfisher, I think.
So T. Kingfisher, she's very open about the fact that this is a different name for Ursula Vernon, but you may not have heard of Ursula Vernon. So Ursula Vernon does a lot of visual. Her graphic novel series Digger won some awards, and I first ran into her when I worked at an elementary school because she has these hamster princess books that are wonderful. My college age daughter bought them because she was feeling nostalgic. They're just very cute, animated, great. And so under the name T. Kingfisher, she writes in the young adult and crossover adult spaces, and they're very fantasy. She does a lot of fairy tale retellings. So the one that I brought was A Sorceress Comes to Call, which is kind of a retelling of the Goose Girl. And it's where the girl's mother is trying to marry someone so she can basically suck the life out of him. And the innocent daughter is, oh, my mom's trying to be evil again. And her humor is so good. She also writes sometimes it's described as horror. I think it depends on the book. The one that I read was called Snake Eater, and it was set in the American Southwest. And I loved it, had some indigenous mythology in it. And I would say it was suspenseful, but I would not have described it as horror. So I think there might be the ones based on Edgar Allan Poe stories that could be more horror like. But I talked someone into trying her out recently because she was like, I was scared away by the horror label. And I was like, I really don't think that they're all horror, but fairy tales, classic literature, different kinds of mythology. If you enjoy those sorts of things, then definitely try her. I think Wolfworm is her most recent one, and I have not read that one. So I can't tell you what it's about.
I do have heard about her horror, and I was like, I really want to try it. This is a year I'm trying new genres, new to me genres, and learn. I moved away from romance, still read romance, but I moved to the mystery space and murder mystery space and the thrillers, and I was like, hey, a little bit of horror might be something to look for. There's a lot of rage, so you might as well just enjoy watching some gore and some specific things. So I'll try T. Kingfisher's Horror Light, which actually might be a great entry point. So
Yeah, I think so. And it also depends on, I think people define horror differently. For some people, it means gore. For some people, it means like violence. And for other people, it's more like suspense or jump scare type
right.
of things. So I like the horror light label for her. There's some suspense, but I was not horrified by it.
And your final recommendation is Elena Cruz.
Yes. So this is an author who has been around for a very long time. So she's probably one of the only ones. Sorry about the glare on here. I have eliminated this book from the library. So that's why she is probably best known for the Blue Blood series. If you were around, and they're probably 20 years old now, but it was kind of a Gossip Girl times Vampire Diaries series. And it became really big. And she has gone on since then to write about she's come into the adult space. I think that 2 years ago, it looks like she wrote The 5 Stages of Courting Dalisay Ramos. I'm sorry, I don't
That's
quite
okay.
know how to say that, but it's a kind of a cross-cultural romance where a Filipino woman comes to the United States and one of her coworkers is interested in, I don't do American hookup culture. And so he kind of starts looking up Filipino customs and trying to woo her that way. Should be very sweet, I think. But the one that I chose, because this one is, I think, 10 years old now, but I'm pretty sure that it came out around the first time Trump was elected, because it's about a teenage girl who's very high achieving in high school, and she gets this trip to go to DC as a delegate, and she becomes involved in or attracted to the son of a senator. And the senator is known for wanting to pause immigration or in favor of immigration reform that would be restrictive. But the problem is that she's just found out her parents are not here legally. And so it's a very well done conversational. It's one that I recommend to students. It really gives you nuance on those. And we could say at this point that maybe it ties everything up a little bit too neatly, but as I've already said, that can also be, sometimes we want to hope that we can have an ending like that, especially when the political situation is as tense as it is.
Yes, I appreciate it. I actually read her Hamilton books. She did actually like
Oh, yes, that's another one.
so it's a little bit Hamilton. It's like Hamilton fan fiction, really, when it comes
Yeah.
but they're delightful. It's like you get to see, she wrote it around the time that Hamilton was big, and there's like a trilogy around them. They're like fun. You get to hear about the American Revolution and Hamilton and then Eliza and all this, Angelica and everyone else. So it's like a fun trilogy that's actually more digestible than, if you like Hamilton, try her Hamilton's trilogy.
Yes. And she writes a lot of Disney tie-ins, the Encanto books. She has written, I think that they're middle grade, but they might be a little bit older than that for Encanto stories.
Yeah. So I love these recommendations. Other authors that have done the crossover or done different things. Ashley Poston used to write, or she writes fantasy, like magical realism, and now she writes actually adult magical realism romances. They're delightful. She's also a delightful person. Amy Spalding wrote a lot of queer books, and then is writing sapphic celebrity romances. There's quite a few of them. I'm trying to think of other YA authors that have real. If I think of some others, I'll put them on the show notes. But there's a lot of crossover. It's pretty normal for to now see YA authors actually trying adult market and or trying new genres, new genres. So, and also someone who may want to go back to reread, it is actually fun just to go back to those books and to go back and see some of the themes that might actually have a conversation. I like the book about Cruz talk about immigration, which is a topical conversation that may feel outdated at the same time because it feels too neatly right now. But I think in some ways it brings us that spark of conversation about having those difficult conversations happen. So,
and in some ways, it's for the teenagers who they can't say like 10 years ago. For them, that's new. Oh, this has been something that we've been struggling with for a while.
Yeah.
Because 10 years ago, they were in like second grade and they really had no idea.
Yeah. So, Kelly, tell us about your Substack.
My Substack, you can find it, is just Kelly Mayfield at Substack. And I write about books for the most part on the notes. Then I give little updates on my writing journey because I would like to be published in fiction at some point. And I just finished my second manuscript there. But for the most part, what I write about is what I'm reading. And I think that I prefer writing about the backlist titles because as much as I love reading new things that come out, I don't know if you noticed in your subscriptions that I'm like seeing the same books recommended over and over again because they're what's coming out this month. And so if you're someone that wants to pick up something that you might have missed the first time around or to get something that's new again, I recently read Donna Tartt's The Secret History, which I don't think has ever really gone out of conversation. And I would say that I didn't enjoy it as much as I expected because people had raised my expectations very high. But I really loved the cozy 90s college feel. And so I think a lot of what I write about is chipping away at that list of all those books that it feels like everyone but me has read this. And then I mix in the new things as well. And I'm trying to add in a little more YA content since it seems obvious that I should have done that before since I'm a high school librarian. But what I read for fun and what I read for work are not always what comes together for me.
Yeah, I feel you. And yeah, I'm one of those people who try to look at hidden gems. I do get access to a lot of early releases just because of the nature of this podcast. But even that, I look for authors who are like up and coming, debut, trying different genres, trying different things, and trying to talk about one, because books are easily be accessible in libraries or even on
Mhm.
KU or specific areas where you can get them for a low cost. Because right now, times are tough, things are expensive, and so how to
Mhm.
get them and stuff. And so having books available for to have easy access is a big one for me. And also discovering those mid lists or those authors you probably may have missed is a big one. But actually looking at, hey, these are things that you haven't seen. Sometimes it's helpful to have those buzzy titles to attract the audience, but the reality is that we don't want to compete with 1,000 people in the library list. We want to go back to the ones I can just borrow right now and read that. You know?
My favorite experience is when you get a breakout hit and realize that it's actually like their seventh book.
Yes.
And then you can go back and you don't have to wait for them to write it. You're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think Tomorrow and Tomorrow was one of those that
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't think of her name off the top
Gabrielle
of my head.
7, because I read her Monica
Yes.
Lewinsky one. That was actually a really good one. It's not Monica Lewinsky, but it's that era of female empowerment and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. But as someone again who's trying to get into the fiction author space, I really can appreciate now how much it takes to keep writing and convince your publisher to keep publishing you when you haven't hit the big lottery right away. And so now I love finding those where they have a breakout hit and then you can go back and start reading those titles that came before.
Yes. Oh, I love this. Thank you, Kelly, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Thanks for listening to the What to Read Next. For more book lists, cozy reads, and library tips, visit the whattoreadnextblog.com. Your next great read might be waiting there.